We'll have successful transition. Thanks, Annika. So just to acknowledge, there are many of us here today, all practitioners working in different fields. We have different professional and personal experience of the very broad umbrella term, emotional-based school non-attendance. Fiona and I, in collaboration with our EBSNER working group, we hope that there's something here for everyone. We hope that the language psychology and strategies that we share today can be implemented and applied in subtly differentiated ways, depending on how you practice, where you practice, and with who. But just to acknowledge that it's going to be different things for different people. The main aim today, our main aim, is around improving confidence and consistency. And it's confidence and consistency with how we talk about EBSNER, so the language that we use. That feels really important. And how we formulate, so how we understand EBSNER need in all its different permutations and on a spectrum. And then a main message for today, amongst many different messages that there are related to good practice in this area, is one of partnership. I'm hoping a theme that we picked up as we talk is we're really advocating for curious and compassionate partnership, working together in an empathetic way. So yes, you'll have 4 themes today, 1 theme on language, 1 on psychology and frameworks. We'll talk about partnership across Surrey systems, with schools and with parents and carers. And at the very end, there'll be a little bit of kind of rapid signposting, links, next steps. As Sandra introduced as our sponsor, this is all in the context of this growing sense of, or growing amount of need, complexity in mental health more generally in children and young people, and then its presentation around participation or attendance. Thanks, Annika. We thought it was really important, really critical to start training like this with insight into parents and carers' experience of emotional-based school non-attendance. I'm really grateful for Surrey Family Voice work, surveying parents and carers and their lived experience of EBSNER need. And so the next 3 slides just kind of focus on that. This is a bit of survey work, 360 responses, and the responses of an EBSNER parent carer group who meet on a monthly basis. And these are some of the themes that came out around their experience of EBSNER. You can appreciate what a real significant set of negative outcomes EBSNER leads to for a young person. But this is just opening our eyes or helping us be mindful of the wider implications for a family system and those around a young person as well. I've highlighted in green what I think are really pertinent points we addressed today. It's that experience of isolation, not being heard, not being understood, trying to make sense of something really complex. Next slide, please. If I can invite you just to pick one of these quotation bubbles in blue. This is the qualitative feedback. This is one person's account of what that EBSNER need meant for them or their family. And for me, reading any of those, again, just really brings to the front of my mind the risk and the cost in terms of our sense of connection or being understood or being empathized with. There's a real risk for those around a young person or feeling isolated, judged, shamed, or under threat. Next slide, please. And to end on a slightly more optimistic note, and really helpfully in terms of our work as practitioners in this area, here are some of the things that parent carers are saying is really helpful. And again, highlighted in green, I think these are the points that we most directly addressed in today's session. It's the idea of shared language, shared meaning, shared understanding. What is this about? What is this behavior? Low participation or low attendance. What's that behavior communicating around unmet need? Something about regular communication, being connected with, having someone to talk to validate and normalize the experience and to offer support. And then just being heard as well, that first bullet point. I'll come back to that kind of tentative tagline for today. It's all about curious and compassionate partnership. Curious about what is this about, compassionate in that we're empathizing with this is a really difficult lived experience for young person, those around young person. And then partnership in that we're working collaboratively for some small, perhaps small change in outcome. Thanks, Annika.
So Dave was talking earlier about the need for the common language across all services, across sort of education, health, social care. So I'm just going to talk a little bit on this slide about defining EBSNER. It's a term that's been, and obviously the huge interest today shows it's a term that's been heard a lot, but it's just really breaking that down a little bit so that we've got that kind of common understanding. So it stands for emotionally based school non-attendance, and we've deliberately chosen in Surrey non-attendance rather than school avoidance, which is used in elsewhere in the country, just because it's brings the focus back on away from the individual child feeling that they're sort of avoiding school rather than thinking about the difficulty for attending. So we have a nice sort of definition here, but I think the key point to think about is it's an umbrella term for a behaviour which results in not being able to attend school. And there's not sort of one single cause. So there's been lots of research on, is it a particular part of the population, a female, male, particular gender issue, but it sort of affects all areas. And it's really that kind of unique interaction of a range of circumstances. We've put the sort of the nice red stars about 1 to 2% of the school population, because when the research was originally done, this was sort of felt to be 1 to 2% of the school population. But what we know is there's been a big increase in school absence for students with additional needs post-pandemic. Already student with a level of special educational needs have a higher rate of absence, but we know that sort of post-pandemic, post-COVID times, that's increased significantly. So just thinking about, say, children with an EHCP, there's a 12.1%, this is sort of nationwide, 12.1% absence for pupils with an EHCP compared with 6.8% for those without any SEN support. It doesn't mean a child or young person who's experiencing EBSNER necessarily has a special educational need, but what we're finding increasingly is there may be some unidentified need or some kind of link towards that special educational need. Next slide, please, Annika. So when we've started looking, we've been doing training with schools. So I've been working on sort of support role training, focusing more on people in schools who are specifically supporting children and young people. And Dave's been working with the sort of whole school level, looking at the school systems. One of the key factors we've been thinking about is what's called the spectrum of EBSNER, which was looked at by Kearney in 2018. But I think previously we've focused very much on the sort of chronic, if you see kind of in the red part, the children who are out of school significantly periods of time. But what we know is that there's this difficulty starts much earlier on, and I think significantly we're getting lots of primary schools coming along to the training, which shows and younger shows that people are recognizing this as a difficulty much earlier on. So one of the key points we're talking about within our training is the need for early intervention. And I know there's also work being done thinking about some children and young people who appear absolutely fine in school, but then actually go home and have a meltdown and finding that very stressful. So we were talking about the kind of the masking and the difficulties earlier. So I think also in this context, it's really important to think about those young people as well. Next slide. So I just want you to take a minute to think about the language that we use, because there are lots of different terms, truancy being one of them, and we may think of a sort of a scale between truancy and EBSNER. Just have a little think. I know some of you are kind of in groups already, but just have a reflection on the first question is what difference might be between truancy and EBSNER, and also then thinking about how we might respond differently to either case. Some comments saying truancy parents and carers aren't aware. Someone saying, I wonder if there's ever a reason for truancy that isn't trauma, anxiety, neurodiversity or stress. So truancy is not wanting to go to school, EBSNER is not being able to go to school. So there's a kind of a difference there. So a couple of phrases about sort of can't or won't attend. So the difference between can't attend and won't attend. And truancy being a choice. Just thinking about then how we might respond when you think about those words, how you kind of might respond, or the always like the kind of emotional response, that sort of, your initial thoughts. Discussion about people not being able to go to school, maybe that being viewed as sort of not wanting to go to school. And also thinking about, when you kind of dig into that, what may be around that. So thank you so much for those comments. It's been really helpful to think about the different kind of the ways these words are perceived. And I suppose the message we're trying to put across today is that as a group, we feel that all kind of school non-attendance needs to be seen in that kind of compassionate, curious way. So thinking about if a child's really not in school or a young person not in school, what is it about, what is it about school? What is it about home? What is it about the wider society that's actually not facilitating them to go to school or kind of keeping them away from school? So I think it's really had some really lovely comments about being curious and thinking about, well, what might be underlining that. Whereas first of all, you might see as a sort of a child just really not wanting to go to school or not being bothered, and then actually digging deeper into it. There may be some home circumstances, or there may be quite often school circumstances for that young person not to be the sort of the can't rather than won't. I'll just move on to the next slide, Annika. And then moving on from that, this is one of the, when we're doing the training, thinking about a first step in understanding EBSNER. So I know when working with school colleagues, it can seem a really kind of confusing, sometimes overwhelming situation. And there's never a kind of a single cause. We're talking about the kind of interactions between a variety of factors. But it's having looked at the kind of research, these sort of 4 functions, if you like, of behaviour were pulled out as kind of common themes. And when we're doing our training with staff, we found this is a really helpful concept to start with, because it starts just to sort of thinking about, what's the behaviour about, what might be the function of the behaviour, what's going on for this young person, and actually kind of thinking then about what the appropriate intervention may be. So the initial one is thinking about avoiding negative emotion, and we see this sometimes. We talk about just uncomfortable feelings, and I quite often say with parents I'm working with that young people and children quite often can't express those uncomfortable feelings. They just feel, oh, and they kind of want it to stop, and they can't explain that. And some people, particularly some young people, particularly have difficulty kind of explaining and articulating how they're feeling. And they just know that actually they have the sort of horrible feelings. If they don't go to school, those feelings resolve. So, it's a sort of very simple kind of cause and effect. Obviously, we might want to dig into that a little bit more to understand about, then sort of tease that out a bit more. A second reason might be the sort of situational avoidance. So there may be specific things, specific lessons that the child or young person is trying to avoid, or very stressful times. They're finding playtime very stressful, or they're finding getting changed for PE really stressful, or there's a particular social situation that may be particularly difficult for them. So there may be specific aspects of school that might be difficult. The third general area is being very sort of attached to the home situation. And sometimes this can be because the child or young person is worried about what's happening at school, at home, sorry, also at school. But the sort of draw to home may be something about, I'm concerned about what's happening at home, or just a really strong connection with the home. And actually that kind of sense of belonging, home is my sense of belonging place rather than school being the sense of belonging place. So in that situation, we might think about, well, how can we increase that sense of belonging in school, as you know, in a way that it is felt at home. And then the final one, which is a little bit more controversial, is and can be seen, I think, as by parents as kind of criticism or a judgment that the young person is actually finds being at home more fun and stimulating than being at school. But I suppose in that case, we need to think about, well, then actually what can we do at school to actually make it interesting and fun and engaging for that young person. So we're just going to move back. Dave's going to talk following now, thinking about the sort of psychological concepts of this.
Thanks, Fiona. So that's kind of closing the lid on language. We're looking for language that encourages curiosity, compassion, and partnership. Now we're going to talk about a specific framework that we're advocating in our use with parents, support workers in schools, and with school leadership teams. And it's going to be about resilience. It starts with this general point around psychological literature and how we view resilience more generally. So I think, get on my soapbox here, I'll start with a bit of a risk. I think there is a bit of a risk with how resilience can be used in day-to-day language. The risk is that resilience is used as this kind of within child binary have or have not, and often a deficiency, a have not for an individual child. There's a risk that we are labeling kids resilient or not resilient. And for those kids who are not resilient, that then becomes a bit stuck or stigmatized. Our view of resilience, one that we advocate, and I advocate that we challenge other adults around a child when we're having our interactions, is that it's a dynamic trait. It's something that changes over time. That it's not a within child feature. It's something that is the result of factors around a young person, factors that contribute to resilience. And furthermore, it's not that it's a young person or an adult who's resilient, it's a system. So a family, a school organization as a whole, a class group, a friendship group, a CAMS team. So it can be a kind of multi-systemic view of resilience. My second kind of soapbox piece, and I've got my lovely image of Tigger here. Often we think about resilience as bouncing back. You get knocked down, you get up again, you have a setback, you bounce back to where you were. I'm really keen that resilience is seen not so much about bouncing back, but more about adaptation or growth. Resilience is what we need, and what the vast majority of us bring to bear on a day-to-day basis in the face of adversity or setbacks. When something really tragic happens, it's not about getting back to the position we were in before. It's about growing around a change or adapting to a change in circumstance. You suffer a really significant bereavement. It's not so much about bouncing back from that. It's about growth around a very real, very valid sadness, for example. So yes, it's dynamic. It changes over time. It's not yes or no. And it's about around a young person, not so much within. Next slide, please. And this is the specific framework that we're taking to schools and school partners, and hoping to introduce with some practitioners as well. So this is called the resilience ball. There is a visual that's in a ball format. This comes from extensive research across multiple decades, different psychologists looking at what factors contribute to a young person, adult, or team being able to adapt and grow around setbacks and adversity. So lots of different ways that you can talk about what contributes to resilience, lots of different lists, frameworks, visuals, and this is the one that kind of combines them all together in what seems like quite an accessible form. So the argument here is for a young person to demonstrate more resilience, for a family to demonstrate more resilience, or a school to facilitate more resilience in their children, young people, the more of each of these blocks, these factors, the better. I'll just go through each of these blocks now and speak a little bit about how that might look in practice. The first is bonding. This is really about relationships, feelings of safety within relationships and trust, and the amount of connections in one's social environment. This is more than just kind of that superficial friendship. It's not observing a young person get along with lots of different peers in a playground. This is they have a trusted adult that they can confide in. They have friendships where they can be their authentic, true self, where they can make mistakes, but there's restoration and recovery. This could be about relationships in the home as well. They have that feeling of unconditional positive regard, that safety net that allows them to go and make mistakes, learn from them, try again. In a school setting, this could be started off with the friendship bench, the lunchtime club in an area of specialist interest. It could be around the pastoral team and how they interact and champion, or make sure that each young person has a champion. We're going to have a breakout room in a bit where we ask ourselves, what role do we have within our professional boundaries facilitating this? I think you can click Annika, and there'll be an animation. Good, yeah. And then just moving on to mastery next. So mastery is about growth mindset, the idea that we all have the capacity to grow, learn, develop new skills. It's about our experience of school, of the curriculum, of learning new skills. It's really fundamentally about self-efficacy, our belief in ourselves as someone who can master, learn, grow, and do well. You can imagine for a young person with a specific literacy difficulty, going into each lesson and having a repeated experience of difficulty or failure or relative hardship in accessing the curriculum and having success, their sense of mastery is really under threat. Meaning is the one that I think gets neglected the most, but can have a real significant shift in outcomes for a young person. And I wonder if in a discussion later, it might be something that we have a really good opportunity to bolster or to work with. Meaning is about supporting a young person to have a dream or an aspiration, some pull factor that motivates them to overcome adversity or overcome challenge or persevere despite setbacks. A dream could be about values, principles, the type of person I want to be. It could be about tangible goals, money, prestige, status, connections, or it could be something more short-term, mastery of a particular subject, discipline, activity. But all of these things are motivating and it helps someone cross over and experience something despite anxious avoidance, for example. Skills is about a wide range of things. Perhaps for us as a group of practitioners, we can think emotional regulation skills as really pertinent. Explicit teaching of skills to manage anxiety would support resilience, the ability to grow around challenge. There can also be things like learning skills, central executive skills, how we manage, organize, and sustain our attention over the course of a learning experience. Thinking about neurodiversity and special educational needs, it could be around social communication skills. But you can see in that area, there are some specific discrete skills that can be taught that can help overcome a potential barrier. And finally, but really critically, a category of facilitation or support that promotes resilience is just having the basics in place. This includes emotional safety, physical safety, food, so good diet, nutrition, sleep. And when these things are not in place, as we can all speak to from experience, it just takes from our ability to respond in a helpful way to setbacks and challenge. So these are all areas, and the way this tool might be used with school partners or families, or in conversation with a young person, or just in how we formulate EBSNA need in all its many and varied complexities. We're looking for relative strengths. So for this young person, in their lived experience, they're getting lots of connection and bonding. They have lots of strengths in their area of meaning. They have a dream, they have a passion, something that gets them out of bed. But actually, there's a bit of a skills deficit. This is where we might want to focus our intervention. Thinking about a school organization or a family, it might be asking the question, how do you support this category of experience for your young person? Is this a school where relationships are encouraged and supported and there's space for relationships? Or is that actually a barrier? Is this a school setting where every young person gets an experience of success and progress in the curriculum? Or are there some barriers to that? So again, it just supports this idea of curious conversation and compassionate conversation, and then partnership around making sure every one of these areas is robust. Next slide, please. And this is just the flip side. You talk about resilience factors. We want more of these. And just to flip it on its head, these are the kind of things that might be our first warning signs, or we might identify as risks for a young person or the system around them. Environments where there is disconnection or isolation, or a young person who is using apathetic language around what's the point. Next slide, please. So there are some specific risk and resilience factors around EBSNER. They're on the slides, and slides will be shared. What I'd just point to, though, is that a lot of these specific EBSNER risk and resilience factors can be linked back to that more generic framework. So I think if you click Annika, and then click again. Thank you. You can see how young person's strengths and interests and their aspirations, ambitions. This is about a young person's experience of meaning in their day-to-day life. Going over to school factors, their relationship with staff, relationship with peers. That's about their sense of connection or belonging. So yes, there's specificity. These are important questions and things to be curious about when thinking about EBSNER. But more generally and more helpful in terms of shared language and open conversation, we're talking about belonging, mastery, meaning, skills, and the basics. We can think about what's more or less in our control. And I think, next slide, please. This is what we're going to lead into now with a bit of discussion. Looking now, and then a short bit on resources after that. Over to Fiona.
Okay, so just going to talk a little bit about partnership working, and I think really the number of people we have on the call today just shows all the different areas that the term EBSNER has been resonating with, and people keen to find more. So it's really helpful to have so many people on the call and thinking about how we might work together, what our role might be, what we might do to support this work. And so just a little slide to think about. So the research has shown, I mean, we obviously know a lot of the difficulties, but trying to find, when things have been successful, when young people and children have been able to get back into school, what's actually worked. So a key thing is the early identification, things like increased homeschool communication, gathering the parents' views, signposting families to effective support within the locality, and thinking about the increased information training available for school-based staff, and also sort of more systemic things coming through. So recognition of anxiety and how that might be lessened by sort of the reasonable adjustments schools may make within their settings. So already we're thinking about moving away from this kind of within young person model to thinking about actually the systems that support the child, support the young person, and then thinking about the kind of wider systems outside of that, because obviously it's something that a lot of people are coming across now. To the next slide. So this is the really recent research, and thinking about the kind of multi-agency working, the supportive approach. And this is one of the reasons we wanted to talk about language that everybody uses, because I know in our conversations with schools and our conversations with families, sometimes the interpretation has not been a shared interpretation. So we've had kind of different emotions about it, different views, different levels of understanding of this being a kind of anxiety-based difficulty and the kind of the can't rather than won't. So this whole idea of being successful practice is that we can actually engage people from a range of areas, but most importantly, obviously engaging the young person and the parent. And then obviously basing the understanding of EBSNA within the local authority, which again is one of the reasons we're doing this this session today, so that across the local authority there's a really good shared understanding and we begin to think about how we can work even better together. When talking with parents, you know, quite predictably, school-based professionals were supported as, you know, cited as the most likely people who might support in this area. And the people who may facilitate this collaboration with parents. But we know also in our work that there are other people who work alongside parents and may actually help to sort of facilitate that work with the young person, with the parents, with the school. And this, you know, facilitate that homeschool partnership. So some of the people on the call today, you may well be in that position, but also having that kind of understanding of what the schools may do and what the wider systems may do to support the young people and support the families. Next slide, please. So one of the key ways we know that young people can be supported who are facing this difficulty is actually a systemic approach from schools, so a wider understanding of emotional well-being. And it's just sort of a nice diagram here that looks at a lot of whole school factors that actually, if they're in place, are going to support young people to feel emotionally safe in school, to develop the resilience we were talking about. So very much the focus has moved from kind of the within child to actually the whole systems of support. And quite often when we're working with families, there are things, small changes that schools have made that actually have facilitated the young person to return back into school, which are much more about the kind of system that they're going into rather than the young person. I mean, having said that, we found that what works really well is a multi-agency approach. We've had colleagues from Dave's team in Mindworks working with a young person, thinking about kind of anxiety and strategies to manage that anxiety. So this kind of real multi-professional approach has seen some really sort of helpful strides forward. You just click again, Anna. And then I suppose thinking about the kind of wider system. So there's a nice sort of, you know, a visual here, but just trying to place your team, yourself, within this wider system with the young person at the front. Because what we know is that successful work approaching kind of just using one system is too narrow, and it's very much this interaction between different systems. So there may be factors that are sort of far wider than just the individual, just the family, just the school. And I know families have spoken to us, again, just, you know, simple things like different professionals' understanding of EBSNER and then having different approaches from, you know, what's been suggested in school. That could cause people a lot of kind of anxiety and upset, or different professionals people are coming across having, you know, different understanding. So actually we can see how, you know, that whole wider system can have a trickle down impact, and it's very much how, you know, things wider than the individual and the family and the school can also impact positively or negatively. So we're hoping for that real kind of positive impact from the work today. Next slide, please. So this is quite a kind of complex, thorough visual, but thinking more specifically about Surrey, these are some of the groups we thought about in Surrey that help support this work. And this may be, again, at a more systemic level rather than individual level. Some are very much working individually, some are working more systemically. So, for example, the educational psychologist team are working to provide some training for schools to make sure that there are systems in place and that kind of really secure understanding is in place, and looking at key support workers within schools. Obviously, I know Mindworks is working at multiple different levels, looking at kind of whole school work, but also doing individual work with young people. And there's obviously a whole range of services there that I won't go through all of them, but just a flavour of who may well be out there. Just give you a moment to read that. Okay, just move on to the next slide. So I'm just going to the next few slides are just to give you an illustration about what we're working with in Surrey with the schools, to put in some whole school systems and to have a common approach across all schools so that we've got a really robust system for early identification. So at the whole school level, thinking about the whole school resilience factors, so not just the EBSNER work, but sessions like compassionate schools, but also thinking about kind of whole school emotional well-being. And we're asking schools to have a review of their school strengths and weaknesses, and thinking about what might need to change. And then putting in a framework also to ensure that where children and young people are experiencing difficulties, then obviously that person is at the centre of all the conversations. So made sure that there's been conversations with the family, conversations with the young person, in order to build up a picture that we can then start to kind of unpick this a little bit. Next slide, please. So from the work of, first of all, we asked people to think about, possible reasons, factors that may support the young person and factors that may be impacting, having discussions with the family, the young person, people who know the people well. And then across Surrey, we have now what's called a support plan. So we have templates that are for all settings to think about gathering this information, putting in this personalised support plan. Because as we were saying earlier, it's not a kind of one size fits all. It's very much about those curious conversations and thinking about what's going to work for this young person. What are the supporting factors? What are the difficult factors? Next slide, please. So these are just some of the interventions, again, within the training that may be used to gather views, and all, again, at the different levels. So thinking very much at the individual child level, the family level, and thinking kind of the whole school level, all these factors interacting together. Next
Can I just
slide,
add?
Anna? Yes, David, obviously, go on.
Sorry, Fiona, yeah, just a kind of whole school, and then at the child level, those expectations, and then Annika on this slide here. These are the resources that we're going into schools with and suggesting that they use in the interest of good partnership working, shared language, being curious and compassionate. These are the kind of resources that we can increasingly be expecting schools to be using or to be interested about. And as much as possible, if we can match up with some of these resources, that's going to help from the young person, family, carers experience of EBSNER support. All of these are going to be found on our EBSNER Padlet and on the local offer, which I'll talk to in a bit.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, so one of the key things we were hoping for from today is actually having the knowledge out in the kind of wider systems, so that everyone's aware of these materials, so that they can, if they do come across schools where these are not known, or maybe there may be one specific person in the school who knows about them, but other people don't, but you can kind of refer back to them, and just that, again, that kind of just sharing the knowledge.
Resources that might help you in your practice and in your role. Next slide, please. So the first port of call, in the Surrey local offer, there is now an EBSNER page. It is live, but it's in draft form, so it's subject to change. But on that page are many and varied links, descriptions, explainers, and just looking to Sue here, there will be links to all of the Surrey documentation that has been shared in today's training. And it's live now, so that's good. So all those support plans, discovery conversations, and what I show next, you can access those on the Surrey local offer. Accessible for parents as well, and carers, and other practitioners of different disciplines. This is again aiming towards consistent language and consistent documentation. So it's all there for all of us to share. Next, and a big thank you to Family Voice Surrey for these recommendations. Yeah, sorry, different type of next, Annika. Thank you for these recommendations. The two websites that parents and carers have found particularly helpful. I recommend having a look. I've enjoyed reading through, and good to signpost parents and carers to who are having this experience, who might just need a space to go and make sense of their experience. And then finally, the 3A and 3B on this slide, we have 2 Padlets. The first Padlet has many and varied helpful EBSNER resources. Those different resources that Fiona spoke about in the early intervention slides, tools for getting child young person voice, family voice, and being interested about what school are doing. It's a bit unwieldy, but it's all there. So I suggest that Padlet is for practitioners to go and explore and cherry pick the things that you like and are relevant for your role. Recently, massive thank you to the psychology service. There's a slightly more curated version specifically for parents. So have an explore of that if you feel comfortable. Signpost and share with parents and carers that you work with. And again, it's guidance documents, explainers, short video clips, and then tools to support a piece of work around some aspect of the resilience framework. Next slide, please. So this is just going to be a couple of examples. This is what the local offer page looks like, and you can see lots of subheadings on the left-hand side. Next slide, please. On there, you have this support guide, just outlining kind of key bits of our ethos or principles around EBSNER support. And this all kind of falls under that umbrella heading of curious, compassionate, and in partnership. Next slide, please. There's a profile of risk document. So for an individual to think about their risk of EBSNER, depending on their current experience and the factors around that young person. Next page, please. And there are the different templates for supporting conversation and formulation around young person need and writing a support plan. I think our aspiration is that more and more incidents of EBSNER support, no matter what the Surrey professional is, where they're located, are using this standard template. And this is so that as a child, young person and family move between different partners supporting with EBSNER, there's the same set of questions, the same approach to formulation, the same underpinning psychology. And they can carry that one document and update it rather than start afresh with a different set of language each time.